Welcome, everyone. I'm very excited to be here with you all. I see by many of the names I know many of you, and many of you have already taken astronaut training, but there's several people on the call today on the workshop that have not. And I just want to say that this little brief webinar was in no way meant to replace the training for astronaut training, but to really give you a richer understanding of the vestibular system and why Mary created the protocol for astronaut training. Was really a means to teach the power of the vestibular system and how, when you go in with precision, what's possible. And we're going to be talking a lot about what's possible clinically when you address the vestibular system from this really precise and powerful way. So I really want to get that point across. We will be talking about later in the presentation, doing the protocol potentially at home for those of you that have been trained and what are the ins and outs of that. And Mary and I will also be sharing ideas about how you could, from the premises of what Mary has laid down, how you could work with some home programming if you have not been trained. And so I go ahead, and I see Mary is with us, and turn things over to Mary here and let her begin. And I will be back and shortly.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. We're going to be sharing some information about my favorite sensory system. I have a real passion for the vestibular system, and it's wonderful to see that there's increasing research since the rehabilitation programs have started, particularly for adults. There's more and more information available on this system. But for a very, very long time, it was kind of disregarded as a system that wasn't that important because other systems could compensate for it when it wasn't working well. And while that's true, there's a lot of overlap and redundancy, as you all know, in the central nervous system. But there's nothing quite as wonderful as when you have a vestibular system that's really functioning optimally, because it really sets you up for being able to engage in all of your life activities much more efficiently. And so I'm delighted that there's so many of you here that are touching in on this information. And I think you're aware that we're going to be doing an in-depth course next weekend for those of you who haven't had the opportunity to do it. And the objective in that course, and I think it would be helpful to kind of give you an overview of the course objectives at this time. So first of all, I think it's really important to appreciate that the vestibular system is the sense that is the most important for survival. So even though it isn't something that we can look at and see and appreciate directly, when it is doing its job, it really is critical for our survival, and it makes everything easier when we have that support. And an important thing about the design of the system is that it's an anticipatory system. So it sets us up for what's coming and allows us to really be fully present, engaged with everything that's important, and able to focus on what is important while ignoring the things that are taking our attention away from that which is important. So when that is working, it's getting our head in the right place to be able to see and hear everything that's going on around us. So that anticipatory aspect is really, really something that's so basic that we don't really fully appreciate how important it is to be able to be alert to that which is important. And also, starting way back with Dr. Jean Ayres, who I think most of you, if not all of you, are aware that she was the person that really got us as OTs and PTs aware
Mary,
of how.
Mary,
Yes.
Excuse me for a minute. There's just a little bit of sound interference, and I think if your hand accidentally touches the computer, it's what's generating it. So if you could do that, because it just makes it hard for it to hear you, and you have such wonderful information to share. So thank you.
I talk with my hands, and so I'll try to. I don't have any pockets to put them in, but I'll see what I can do. Sorry about that. So Dr. Ayers, as I was saying, really helped us to appreciate how important this system is for everything that we do, and that it is the system that is most likely, most frequently involved when we have sensory integrated dysfunction. So I think that underscores how important it is for us to really have an in-depth understanding of this system. and so it's a very tiny system that's tucked right in the temporal bone behind our ears. So it's a bilateral system, and it's not just a receptor or one type of receptor. There are actually 5 different vestibular receptors in the inner ear, and each of them play a very important role in our comprehensive understanding of where we are in the field of gravity, so that we can navigate through our environment purposefully and successfully. It's very interactive because the cochlea, as you know, is also in that inner ear, and so we have integration between these two systems right before it even before information even gets into the central nervous system. So learning how to activate all 5 of these vestibular receptors in a precise way really helps us with all aspects of therapeutic intervention with our clients. So the course is designed to help identify vestibular issues and ameliorate them, so that all of the sensory systems can work harmoniously for all of our daily activities. And the activation is accomplished. We're always when we're on the planet, we're always on in the field of gravity, and so this system is activated when we move our head in various orientations in space. And so I like to think of this system as a multiplanar movement system. And so if we want the system to be fully engaged in giving us all of the important information that it's designed to give us, it means that we have to get our head in many, many different orientations. And unfortunately, in today's world, we're not doing that. We're tending to be quite sedentary, and to have our head almost always in the upright position. So really appreciating that multiplanar movements, and certainly that's important in our therapeutic interventions, and it's important for the children that are now having to be at home all of the time. They can't just be sitting in a chair. They need to move in order to be physically and emotionally and socially, cognitively, in every way to be able to handle this challenge of being pretty much isolated. We have to find ways of moving. So we're going to touch upon that a little later. So as I mentioned, we owe a great deal to the really wonderful research that Dr. Jean Ayers provided for us early on. And so in order to appreciate this system, we really have to understand the neurological foundation. And so the Astronaut protocol that I developed, well, first of all, we call it the Astronaut program because but when we do precise activation of this system, is very similar to the kind of training that is done in these space programs to get the astronauts prepared to go into outer space. And so the specific movements that we teach are designed to be activating the neuroanatomical receptors in a precise way. So it's not like we've invented a way to move because it's unique, but the movements are designed to bend the hair cells of the vestibular system. You know, this is a fluid-filled system, and as we move, we are bending hair cells that fire and give the brain all of this wonderful information. So the activation of this vestibular cochlear system is what provides many different kinds of support for activities such as being able to have a sense of centeredness, you know, to be able to balance in the field of gravity, to have your body properly oriented, to be safe and functional, is critical under all conditions. So whether we're in a stable environment, or maybe we're on a bus or something where we're on an unstable surface, under all of these conditions, this system is keeping us safe as long as it's doing its job. And it has a lot to do to support the timing and the rhythmicity of the movements that we make. So, you know, the vestibular and cochlear system both are working interactively to support timing and rhythmicity. And as you think about it, many of the children that we see, they really don't have really good timing of their movements or fluidity and rhythmicity in these movements. And also, these two systems working together are going to give us a really clear sense of three-dimensional space. Without this, we really don't have that clear sense of I'm here and you're there, and you know, and I need to interact with maybe something that's moving, like maybe I'm trying to catch a ball. We really have to be able to have this sensory understanding of the world that we are functioning in three-dimensionally. And when we talked, I mentioned already about the adaptability of the system really anticipates how as we're moving, if we trip, it anticipates that we automatically need to get our arm out and protect us so we don't bump our head. So the kinds of physical movements that we make relative to the things that are changing in our environment are dependent upon this anticipatory information that sets us up for success. And also a lot.
Mary, just
I couldn't do anything about
no,
it.
No, I just, there's still some of that other interference, and potentially from the keyboard, and people are missing some keywords. So just a reminder about potentially touching that. I know Tracy has muted all the other people, so I think that's where it's coming from. So if you could just be mindful not to touch the keyboard, sorry.
Okay, well, I'm very sorry. I'll do the best I can. So having this system working helps us to do things that require a sequence of things, like when we thinking of oral motor control, we can't move our tongue precisely without having this system guide that movement. And in order to not aspirate food, we have to coordinate our sucking, our breathing, and our swallowing. And so the underlying vestibular support is critical to having this unfold in a very rhythmic, spontaneous, regulated way. And in order to appreciate the world around us, we have to have this clear sense of where we are in order to interact and comprehend all of the things that are happening that we're picking up through all of the other sensory systems. So first of all, we have to be centered within our own body in a place in space. And that is one of the really important things that we get from this vestibular system. Next slide. So when we don't have good vestibular function, we can't, a lot of times that isn't identified as being the primary or underlying problem. So we have to rely on behaviors that are visible, that we can see. And when I'm going to go through some of these common ones and appreciate that any of them that are not working well, for example, if we have poor balance, we can be assured that we have underlying less than optimal vestibular support for our neuromuscular control to be balanced in space. And this system can, like other sensory systems, can be over or underactive, and that then we're not going to be able to modulate our movement activity unless the system is providing support. And also, if we don't have this clear sense of exactly where we are in our environment, we're like the children that we often refer to as being lost in space because they don't have that clear sense of exactly where they are that should be coming from the vestibular system information. And so when we see children that are moving, maybe they don't have a nice cadence to their walk because of that lack of vestibular support for organizing the rhythmicity of their movements. Children that are afraid to be in the dark is another example, because this is a child that most likely doesn't have good vestibular function, and they're overusing vision to know where they are in their environment. And so when they have to go into the dark, that is really very disruptive to their feeling of well-being, because we've taken away vision from being able to keep them safe in their environment. And when you see a child that is really hyper vigilant, they're just really having to watch and make sure everything is where they think it should be. Oftentimes they're having to overuse vision, and their vision can't work correctly unless it has vestibular support, as one example. So a child may have a depth perception problem. They don't know how close, if someone is moving toward them, they don't have a sense of how close they're getting to their body. And all of this becomes a vestibularly based visual problem that is disrupting function. And another issue that we see is not only do children have eye-hand coordination problems, but they also, if they have vestibular dysfunction, they have eye-head coordination. They may not be able to get their head properly oriented to that visual information or that sound information. If we hear a sound, if we turn our head toward the sound source, then we're getting balanced information through both ears. but that does mean that we have to be able to position our head correctly in order to get a really precise visual and auditory information. So anytime you see a child that has oculomotor issues, like maybe they have difficulty tracking a moving target, or they're rubbing their eyes, having those kinds of difficulty, you can rest assured that they do not just have a vision problem, they have an underlying vestibular problem, because the visual system cannot work optimally without vestibular support. And then we have some children who have great difficulty tolerating movement, or being moved by someone else, or even just sometimes just seeing something else moving may make them feel dizzy. Or on the other hand, we have children that are spinning objects visually, and what we may not necessarily appreciate is that visual observation of movement is being registered by the vestibular system as well. So many of the children who have autism have various kinds of vestibular dysfunction, and one of the ways that they activate their vestibular system, they discover, is that they can spin objects. And so their system at some level knows it needs more vestibular activation, and so they're finding ways of activating that system without even realizing that that's what they're doing. So lots of behaviors that are a tip-off to underlying vestibular dysfunction. And children that are fearful of being moved by someone or stepping onto an unstable surface, they're not getting that clear understanding of exactly how their body is oriented in the field of gravity. And these are not just physical problems that we see from vestibular dysfunction. It also has a huge impact on cognitive performance. We are a lot of what we do at the conscious level is very, very dependent upon the underlying processing, and that is really highly supported by the vestibular system. And also our emotional tone. I think we've all experienced that if we aren't moving, we tend to get sluggish, tired, not alert, and moving makes us feel more alive. We're much more animated, not only physically but cognitively as well. So these are some of the typical kinds of behaviors that are tip-off that in fact we have underlying vestibular dysfunction. As I said earlier, Dr. Ayers says one of the most frequently a part of that whole processing. So there are many, many things that can disrupt the functioning of the vestibular systems, starting in utero. The fetus that may not be getting enough movement stimulation from a mother who is on bed rest, or other kinds of things. So often we find that these vestibular and other sensory processing issues actually start in utero. And another one that is very, very common is a history of ear infections. When we have chronic ear infections, sometimes the inner ear is processing movement and sound correctly, but at other times it's not. And the brain doesn't like to have inconsistent input. So, there are many of our children that actually have suppressed vestibular information because the brain makes essentially an executive decision to say that since I can't rely on vestibular information, I will compensate by using my vision to keep me oriented in my world. And so that vestibular system becomes suppressed and doesn't, even though we might be getting movement stimulation, that information is not getting into the central nervous system the way it is designed to do. So that is often part of a history of children that we see. And there are many different kind of trauma can cause disruption of the system. Genetics can play a role. Allergies, with the congestion that comes along with allergies, and stress and just emotional issues. All of these things are likely to have an impact, a negative impact on the integrity of the vestibular system. So it's not at all unusual for some of these things that are listed here to be included in the diagnoses of the children that we're seeing. And some of us might even be working with adults. And I didn't mention it at the beginning, but vestibular activation is powerful throughout the lifespan. It's not just something that we would do with some people. We all need to have much more movement as part of our daily routines in order to be able to function optimally. And certainly when there is dysfunction, it needs to be addressed in a very precise way to ensure that we are getting optimal performance. Next slide. So
Mary?
Yes, were you going to?
Yeah, I was just going to chat about this. Yeah. So I wanted to talk a little bit before I go into the slide and some of the considerations for people who are trained in therapeutic listening now. And some of the questions that came were from people who are trained in therapeutic listening. But for those who are not trained, I'm sorry, who are trained in astronaut training, those of you that are not trained in the astronaut training, I want to just talk about and compare and contrast a couple of cases that I think really show you the power of using this protocol in a really precise way and on a regular basis, really. I just want to talk about 3 kids, 2 of them with autism and 1 of them with more sensory integrative sort of / attentional issues. So the first child was an 11-year-old with a diagnosis of autism who, for all intents and purposes, had a lot of language but didn't use it. And we did start with him. Interestingly enough, his parents brought him for therapeutic listening because he had done so well with therapeutic listening, which is sort of interesting. And his therapist had done a great job doing that, and he had made some nice gains with that. And Tracy and I both felt like it was really the underlying vestibular issues that were getting in the way at this point in time, and that more sound was helpful, but it wasn't where he really needed to go at this point in his progression. And he came to his one of his early sessions with his OT, who was fabulous, who had done a lot of work in relationships. She was the one who had done the therapeutic listening and gotten so many gains with him. And I talked to her about the vestibular system and had she ever done astronaut training and used the rotary protocol more precisely. And she looked at me and she said, well, I was so concerned about it. And this is really a classic thing that we see with therapists, with the astronaut training. We've been trained, and I think it's a good thing to be cautious with using rotary input because it can have noxious, like it can make you not feel good in some individuals. That is not very true in most kids we see. It is true in some, granted that. But anyway, and so people have been shied away from using rotary input for that reason. And also there's quite a lot of speculation and caution in the SI world about rotary input and seizures. And so we can just chat about that in a little bit here, but not in great depth, because that's really meant for somebody who's trained in that. And she felt like rotation caused him to go away more. And that was part of the problem. He'd go away in his head into movies, and, you know, he literally can watch movies in his head, kind of a cool thing he could do, but it would then make him not connected to what was going on in the moment. And so I said, well, you know, I always want to see things for myself, because people use words like shut down. I want to know, what does he look like and what's happening? So we did put him on the astronaut training board, and I did the rotary portion of the protocol. He also did, I didn't do the ocular in that moment, because I was just really interested in that moment in time of what the rotary would give me. And I'm going to tell you that on subsequent sessions, we did add the ocular motor portion of it. But in that session, we use the rotary part of the protocol, which is in sitting with the head in a precise position, so that you get a precise activation of the horizontal canals in and go in both directions, and then in side lying with the head in a very precise position, so that you get the superior and inferior canals. That's the purpose of that, to get the whole system activated in terms of the rotary receptors. And we did that in side lying on right and left sides in both directions, so that we activated all of the semicircular canals, if you will. And then we followed it with some linear vestibular and lots of postural work. And that was in one session as part of an intensive. And he was being seen for 5 days. He came in the next morning, and the mom walked in the door, and she looked at me and she said, "More vestibular, please." And I said, "What do you mean by more vestibular, please?" She said, "You know, we left here and he talked to me we went to the mall. He talked to me the entire length of walking the mall. He has never talked. I mean, he can say anything, but he just didn't use it. He had never been present and had a conversation that long with me ever in his life." And so you see, he also had other issues, postural issues, ocular issues that we were going to work towards, but just what it gave him in terms of his regulation of arousal and his sense of himself in the space in a clear way that he could relate. And so really powerful case in point. The next young man, also a young man with autism that I saw closer to the age of 9. So I'm seeing kids later. This is not in, you know, younger, but a little bit later was a young man named Sam, who the astronaut portion, the astronaut training protocol, both the postural visual components of it, the rotary and the ocular, along with other home programming, was so powerful. And his mom, what we do in our clinic is we train the parents. And so to be able to train the parents, point number one, the therapists need to be very well versed in the protocol. You need to know it in and out and precisely. And I trained the mom, and she continued to use it really throughout the school year. And one day she said to me, "I don't understand why more parents aren't trained to deliver this protocol, because if Sam doesn't have his astronaut training in the morning, he doesn't have as good a day at school." Now, I want to say to you, does that mean he needs to do it the rest of his life? No, it was a powerful input for continuing to wake him up and keep him in his body. You know, if you're severely impacted by your autism, you have differences in sensory processing, and sometimes need that input more intensely. But I do want to say also, in that case, in that time frame of the year in school, his gains continued to progress upward in terms of organizing his body in space, being able to sit still, being able to use his eyes together, better eye-hand coordination, better visual perception, more organization of his behavior, less self-stimulatory behavior. And so to me, I wouldn't want to treat without this powerful tool. And I'm grateful to Mary. What I failed to mention in the beginning is that Mary and I together have a combined clinical experience, and we're quite proud of it, because Mary still continues to clinically reason with therapists and support therapists and to teach. We have a combined clinical work experience of over 100 years. And I think we're proud of ourselves for still moving. And although I'm quite a bit younger, Mary is sort of my hero. So I have to say, it's really amazing to have a professional that has stayed working and stayed clinical for that amount of time. And what I want, Mary, her work to me, I'm going to say to you in the beginning, I didn't get the precision piece, that I actually probably didn't really grasp how important the precision was in that until Mary, I was lucky enough to have Mary come to my clinic, and really she saw what we were doing. And we were doing a lot of vestibular activities, but we really, and some astronaut training, but we weren't real precise about the head position or how we were doing the pen lights. And I just am going to admit that right now, because when Mary really fine-tuned us in the way we were following the protocol, we saw more and more gains. The last child, just I wanted to talk about, we teach him in the astronaut training course as a full course, had a lot of classic difficulties of what you would see of a child with sensory integrative issues that had a real postural ocular nature to him. He had difficulty sitting still, he had difficulty paying attention in the classroom. Parents felt like he really, the teacher wanted them to use ADD meds and they didn't want to. So mom had caught on to that maybe his eyes weren't working from another source, and had taken him before she came to see us to an optometrist, not a developmental optometrist, but an optometrist who gave him glasses to help his eyes work better together. And at that point in time, mom mentioned to the optometrist that he would be going to OT, and he said, and he rolled his eyes and said, like, that's going to work, is basically what happened. Now, we saw Jack for a period of about 11 months, and a lot of that was every 2 weeks or so. It wasn't always weekly treatment, and some treatment intensives. And toward the end of treatment, mom took him back to the eye doctor, and his eyes had improved significantly. And the eye doctor said, see, I told you the glasses would work. And mom said to him, see, I told you OT would be helpful. He never wore his glasses. So I love that story. That's absolutely the truth. That really shows you the power of persistence, power, precision, and teaming with parents. And I think right now we have this opportunity, those of you that have the training in astronaut training, to sharpen your skills. It is not an easy thing to always do through telehealth, but if you're going to be using it in that format, in supporting clients, make sure you're well versed in the protocol, and then make sure that you really train the parents in that precision. And that would be something you might have to do in a session without the child. I know when we have parents in clinic, we always make the parent show us. After we have trained them, we want to watch them to make sure they have all the fine-tuned points of it. So that's something that you could potentially do in a Zoom platform, and you could teach the parent, and you could have the parent record it so that they could study it, and then maybe the next time come back and show you that with the child. People have been asking questions about, in that format, equipment. So we do use the astronaut training board that's available from astronautboards.com, and she is in the process of problem solving a way to sanitize that equipment, like having a different cover potentially. That was a question that came in around the astronaut boards. I would say right now there is the potential, if you could, to actually cover that with a towel and safety pin it, and then if you're going to use multiple kids, if some of you, because some of you are still in clinic, and then taking the towels off and washing them. That would be what I would do, and just use one towel per child and then sanitize those towels if you are still practicing in the clinic. If not, you have a family where the family is already kind of together. And that might be something that we all are going to have to move to, because it doesn't look like some of what we're experiencing right now is as short-lived as I think we'd hoped it would be, and we may be back in clinics with way more precautions at this point in time. So that is something that the person who produces the boards is actively working on. Another question would be, well, what if I want to use the protocol and the family doesn't have a board right now and they're not coming in? There is the potential to adapt office chairs and use an office chair. I know that we were actually in Alaska and Mary found an office chair and used it as a demo for the special ed director of how you could do astronaut training in an office chair. If the office chair has a smooth rotation, sit and spin would be maybe another kind of aspect. You see, people have also asked the question mailed it in ahead of time about what about the astronaut sounds, because you might have that with the booklet, with the CD, but the astronaut sounds are available on the Therapeutic Listening app and can be downloaded. So Mary, did you want to say something?
I was just going to say, since, like adapting the office chair, which if you have it is a good one. For little children, you may possibly have a big Chinese walk that children could get in, or you could take a cardboard box and use duct tape and tape it to, if you have a little Lazy Susan in your cupboard, and then you could have them rotate on that. So just there are things that are available in your environment that could really be good. The last one that's really good to get the sideline position is the spooner board. Some of you may have that, and it's only about $45. I know we don't want to be giving people a lot of things to buy, but that's one that has a tremendous amount of versatility to be used in a home environment. So those are just a few possibilities.
So another thing to consider is, so Mary talked about all 5 receptors in the vestibular system. So I just talked to you about the rotary part of the protocol, which is the semicircular canals, which is 3. The 2 other receptors are all linear. So considering other ways to do linear vestibular activity, and you can take a beach towel and use it like a scooter board. Many of the activities that you can do on a scooter board, you can have the family do with a beach towel where they're pulling the child around. So one of my favorites would be they would lay on their tummy. I prefer a lot of prone and supine against gravity, lay on their tummy, and as long as they hold up their head, that's the gas. Or they lay on their back, as long as they hold up their head and stay in a more curled up position, that's the gas. And if their head goes down, that's the brake. Or you can use, I think many of you might know, swinging in a blanket. You could have families also, if they could source somewhere, and this again might be an expense, a sheet of Lycra. I know that I was just talking with a friend of mine who's doing some telehealth, and she was in, her family's from a small community where she drove over and dropped a piece of Lycra off on somebody's porch so that they could use that in multiple ways. You can also potentially knot it and slip the knots through one side of the door, so that then you close the door, lock the door, and then you could manipulate the 2 ends of the Lycra so the child could play in it more like a swing and do some different kind of movement patterns in there. You really want to consider, when you're doing activation of the vestibular system, the frequency, intensity, duration. Some kids need it more frequently, especially if it's less intense. The more intense it is, and some of our kids need great intensity. You may want to consider, does the child have a swing set in the backyard, and could you adapt that in a way to also be able to hang potentially other pieces of equipment to change body position in space. Another consideration for those of you that are trained in the astronaut training protocol, you will know that we always use something called the PrEP program, and it's an equipment-free protocol that moves the head in ways to activate all of the receptors. And so The first one would be where you're standing with your arms out to the side and you twirl. I actually saw it on a commercial that was done by Uber showing different activities that people were doing and how people were surviving social distancing. And they had this little toddler with his arms out twirling. Well, you could do twirling. Twirling in one direction, twirling in the other. What about reaching down between your legs and picking something up and then putting it back over your head? Movements that are in this motion. Maybe you're just tick-tocking like a clock. You know, you might be doing some of those activities to support schoolwork. The vestibular receptors, as Mary has taught us all, are in the head, and it's not just the activity that is linear and rotary and what is the piece of equipment or your body doing, it is how your head is moving. So moving your head through all angles in space, and that's something that Mary really brought to the table that seems really obvious, but that most clinicians were not aware of when Mary started to teach the astronaut training and started to really bring like her flavor of more power and precision into the world of OT. And so thinking about pairing different movement activities. Another thing to consider, and I know that it is mine and Tracy's forte, and Mary also uses quite a bit of it, is that one of the vestibular receptors, the saccula, is going to be activated by sound. So simply having dance parties with music that has a heavy rhythm. You can have a dance party on a gym ball if family has that. You can put in a dance break if family is doing school routines. And in the dance party with the gym ball, how are you going to move the head in all kinds of directions? So it's really the template of what we call the prep program, but take it into creativity, into adaptability. That's what is the nature of what we do as occupational therapists. Mary, I don't know if you want to add anything else to this.
Well, it's really quite unlimited in terms of ways to get children moving. You can even work on some of the things like children like to learn how to do cartwheels. This would be a great opportunity to you know, help motor them through it. And some of these things are more for older or younger children. One thing I have is that, you know, parents need ideas about how can they get their children to be moving when they have so much confinement. And so you could actually create a list for each child that you're consulting with of ways that would be appropriate or ability appropriate for them. Like practicing standing on your head in a corner is another one for children where you're trying to have them get some academic skill. You could have them measure the rooms by tandem walk. You know, they have to measure their foot, and then they have to steps, and so they could calculate what's the size of the room. So just basically taking very, very simple ideas. You know, just standing and doing jump rope. You know, you can have like a movement break for the kids that are in school, or you know, or on computers doing academics. Have these breaks where they could be even just bouncing a ball, but have variety. So it's not like just one activity that, because as you know, children get bored quite easily. So having just the whole variety, or you know, or setting up stepping stones to walk across, or even having to step in cardboard boxes at different heights, just things that kids can help set up and take down, and activities where an older child is maybe helping with a younger child, like putting a rope on a cardboard box. An older child could be pulling a child around like a sled in a cardboard box. So just using things that you have at home, but having a list so that you can make it more interesting because of variety.
And Mary, I think another point, that those are lots of great standing and balance and coordination. Another point is to come underneath that for some of our kids that really need to work against gravity, and just considering doing their schoolwork in different positions and taking rolling breaks. you know. So and so working in prone tummy time isn't just for babies. It's really critical to get the head, the closer you get your head to gravity, the more weight, the more proprioception, the more vestibular input. So just consider some of those things and creating some movement breaks in different positions. We
And
also
using
have,
a blanket,
yeah, using
creating
a,
tunnels that kids have to crawl through, and they can create their own tents and tunnels, and just it's amazing all the things you can do with a blanket.
okay, and I just want to be mindful of time. Is there another slide here, Tracy? No, we created those yesterday. Okay. Oh, I think we've been doing this. Okay. We just tried to put down all the things that we wanted to make sure that we talked about. So that prep program, so the prep program is in the astronaut training book. You can simply just use that, but using it as a template to generate more creative ways of look at the positions in the prep book and what position somebody's head is in, and then try to create that, or how are they moving their head through space. And I said, I know even many people might not have taken the training, but might have the astronaut training book. I know that as Mary and I travel around and teach, and we've been all over, oftentimes people will invite us in and show us their clinics, and I invariably see an astronaut training book on some therapist desk. So they're out there in the world, and they are also, if you don't have one, still available from astronautboards.com, as well as from Vital Sounds, and I think some of the other people that carry therapy equipment carry them. But I will caution you that to dive into the full rotary protocol without the training is not really what we ever meant people to do. That was really meant to be a guidebook and an understanding. So I wouldn't be doing that if you don't have further training. In terms of the prep program is fine, but I think doing the rotary part of the protocol is not a good idea, because it seems seemingly simple, but it has a lot of complexity and a lot of things that you really need to understand around that. I just want to make one more point, and then I'll let you continue, Mary, or we could see if there were questions that people had for us other than the ones that have already come in. But look at when you're doing these movement activities, you really want to have the body as organized as possible. So you want to avoid, if a child is doing something in any extremes of motion, so extreme extension with the head cocked back on the shoulders wouldn't be good, or really slumped over wouldn't be good. You want to have them in relatively good alignment. And if they're doing rotation, you really want them rotating from their center, not just a head or an arm back behind them. So that's another thing to really be able to understand, is how well organized movement contributes to the integration. It's not just the vestibular input. And so much of what I see when people say vestibular is disorganizing, it's not because of the vestibular, it's because they're doing it in ways where the body is not well organized. Now, even if a child doesn't have his own really good organization of posture, you can support and change things by the activity. And so for right now, for some of you to know how to do that might require more learning, but I'm going to say, movement patterns that don't look good, they look awkward, okay? And if you imitate what a child's doing, you'll feel that it doesn't feel good in your body. It feels good for your body to be organized and for all its parts and pieces to be connected to each other, and for all of its parts and pieces to be in the right place for the function. So I think that's another thing. Does it look fairly organized? It's not going to be perfect with a lot of our kids, but does it look more organized? So I don't know, Mary, if you wanted to add to any of that.
Well, I'm just continuing to think about things that people may have at home. Like you were talking about getting out of the upright position. So sometimes families will make like a family puzzle. So if you put this puzzle out on a piece of cardboard, you can move it out of the way. You can move it, you can put it under a bed when you're not using it, for example, and then you would have it on the floor, so that instead of sitting at a table to make a puzzle, they have to be in quadruped or prone on elbows while working on a puzzle or other activities. things like you probably, if you look through the games that you have at home, you probably have a twister game, which is a great one for kids to get their body and head in many different positions. So using stairways. This might have to be supervised, but you can, if you have a sleeping bag, you can sit in that and maybe put a pillow in it, and you can slide down the stairway because the sleeping bag is very slippery. And one dad actually taped cardboard boxes to the stairs in a way that he made a slide that went down. So if since dads are home and they are often able to create things like that, there just really are so many things that can be done with simple materials and get the whole family involved. I think one of the wonderful things that's been happening is that families really are having an opportunity to engage with each other and really build deeper bonds, which
Mary, I just want to say the cardboard slide thing I saw on an Uber commercial this morning. So if people want to know what that would look like, you could Google the Uber COVID-19 stay-at-home commercial, because that's where I just saw that same thing and thought, what a great idea. And I just want to add to, that I'm really thinking a lot of positive things are coming out of the stay-at-home order, and I agree with the family thing. And I think family also encouraging, if you're in an area where it's okay to go outside and you can find woods or a nature trail, and then exploring climbing on any downed tree branches and climbing, and you could climb on them and crawl on. We have it's just a beautiful area with all these old trees that unfortunately had come down in a storm, but just climbing on them hand and foot would be a great way, or potentially balancing with their hand held, or kids being able to swing on a tree branch or hold a skinny tree and twirl themselves around it, or jump and twirl hanging onto it. So just really getting super creative in the out of doors. And I think sometimes if you get families started, they'll generate a lot of their own ideas.
And back to in the house, some people actually are fortunate enough to have a trampoline, but if you don't, you can take one of your mattresses and put that on the floor, and that can make a nice substitute for a trampoline.
Okay, and then I'm just kind of sorting through the questions, Mary, and somebody is just asking a question about somebody that does tongue clicking with head movements. And to me, tongue clicking is a way to generate a sound that activates the space, and head movement is a way to help you get more vestibular input. So that's actually a child that needs more of the vestibular, and then they also need more of the spatial piece, which you can get through adding the auditory. And the Astronaut soundtrack does have a spatial as well as a focal auditory component to it.
And speaking of sounds, I think so many, not just the children, but people are really frustrated with being so confined. And I think making power sounds is a really wonderful way to not only engage respiration, but to express feelings. So that's one that families could have a lot of fun with.
Okay, and so this is a really perfect question for us right here, Mary, is somebody is saying, are there any particular activities that will help focus? And I'm going to answer, and you can answer it too. All of the activities we're talking about for children struggling with their online lessons, absolutely. Setting them up with movement before they go online and taking lots of movement breaks. And somebody's saying, should it all be linear because that's more organizing? Not necessarily. I want to say it's an urban myth in OT that is not true when you dive in to sensory integration and understand the depths of it. Sometimes for me, the rotary has been the most organizing component for many of my kids, and without that, I don't get attention. But that is also Yes, rolling, but combine that with linear and what Mary's saying, rolling gives you body organization and getting specific about that body organization. Resisting rolling to facilitate more rotation along the spine versus stiff rolling. And many different ways to do that. If you have been on some of the other free webinars that we did, we actually shared some videos on rolling. And so you might go back, and we have those posted on our website if you haven't seen those. And we will be also sharing those in links and emails, but we've just been sending so many emails, we didn't want to overload people. Okay, so that was a great question. Where would there be information? Hi, Gail, by the way. She's a friend from a long time ago on any upcoming courses. We do have one coming up May 1st and 2nd. Is that right, Tracy? And then you can go to our website to find out about that. And then there's another one coming up in July, I believe. So you go to our website to find out that. Thanks, Gail. Good to see you. Okay. Okay, good. People are just loving your ideas, Mary. Okay, so I think that we got to the ends of any questions about that. Gail's also asking if we're coming to England, which we don't have plans right now, but maybe in the future. So Tracy put up for us a list of courses. And then also maybe, Tracy, if you could share a link to those past recorded webinars. I don't know if that's a possibility for you because people are asking about those, and I'm going to just kind of just point you to, there's the courses here, but really a big thank you to Mary. I'm really looking forward to teaching with you in the coming week. And I just also really want to thank Mary because personally, she inspires me. I could choke up on that. Every time I start to go off track with my own taking care of myself and moving, Mary always seems to show up and inspire me. And I'm just really hope that you get to take advantage, if you haven't already, of Mary's teaching in the past, that hopefully you could join us in a future course, and that would be lovely. We really welcome anybody who wants to join. So thank you so much, Mary.
Sheila, and thank you all for coming, and good luck with being creative with movement to support your parents until they can all be back in the clinic.
Yeah, thank you so much. Bye. Thank you, Tracy.
Thank you to both Mary and Sheila and all of your participation, your wealth of knowledge, and to the participants for engaging in today's webinar.